Production funding for Ruckus has been provided by gifts from Dave and Jamie Cummings, the Fred and Lou Hartwig family, Peter and Barbara Gattermeyer, the Courtney S. Turner Charitable Trust, John H. Mize, and Bank of America N.A. co-trustees, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Ruckus, our weekly food for thought fight, where we fight tooth and nail and sometimes tongue-in-cheek over the news of the day and the trends of the times. I'm Mike Shannon. The Ruckettes join me shortly, and our topics this week: electing a mayor, debating the Electoral College, roast and toast, and education pre-K to K-12 and beyond. And that's where we start with our Newsmaker segment. Joining me is the superintendent of the Kansas City, Missouri School District, Dr. Mark Bedell. Dr. Bedell, welcome to Ruckus. Pleasure to meet you. Thank you for coming in.
Well, thank you, Mr. Shannon, for having me here today.
On Tuesday, Kansas City voters are going to vote on a 3/8 of a cent sales tax for pre-K education. This is something Mayor James has backed and wanted. You and other school administrators in Kansas City, Missouri have said you don't want this tax passed. And yet, I know you have also said pre-K education is valuable, something that you hope young children will have someday in Kansas City. So what's the basis for the opposition to the 3/8 of a cent tax?
Well, I think there's far too many that I can probably share with the audience right now, but I'll talk about a few of them that I think are of extreme importance. One, we're utilizing a sales tax. We talk about raising about $28 million a year. There's no guarantee that we'll hit that $28 million every year, right? And I think that's a major concern. I think the fact that it's an economic development sales tax, and anybody who knows what's happened in the Kansas City Public School District around abatements and incentives and tax incremental financing, we probably lose, or we don't see 31 to 35 million a year already. So we're going to take the last 3/8 cents, which in my opinion should be utilized to do some type of economic development east of Troost, where we have food deserts, where we don't have businesses operating, to help enhance those communities. But we want to turn around and use that to fund early childhood education, and I think that's a problem. I think it ties our hands as respective superintendents. It doesn't give us an opportunity to work locally with our community to go after a levy, which we think would go a lot further, but also continually give us the autonomy that elected boards were selected to do.
So let me ask you this: if the 3/8 of a cent sales tax is approved by voters on Tuesday, what do you do then? Do you turn down the money, refuse to implement the program?
Absolutely not. I mean, if it passes, I think the district will move forward just as any other school district with continuous expansion of early childhood. I think that the message that's out there right now is that districts haven't been doing anything. I authorized 1,100 tuition-free pre-K seats the first day I took this job. I also started one of the first regional early Head Start programs at one of my high schools, where we educate kids from birth until 4. And so we've been very intentional around expanding early childhood, and it's a part of our strategic plan.
What ages are we talking about in pre-K?
Well, and for us, our school district currently serves 3- and 4-year-olds, and we offer full-day services to those students who attend. The plan focuses only on 4-year-olds.
And what do you teach 3- and 4-year-olds?
I mean, I think it's at that phase you're beginning to introduce them to letter sounds, making sure that they can count from 1 to 10, understanding shapes, understanding colors.
It prepares them for later education?
The fundamental building blocks that give them a strong foundation as they then get ready to enter into kindergarten.
A few weeks ago, you were scheduled to be on the program. You had to cancel at the last minute. Then the big news was the district is on the way to full accreditation. Can you refresh our memory about that?
Yeah, absolutely. We have worked extremely hard, and I love to give credit where credit is due. In our press conference, I credited 3 former superintendents for tough decisions that they had to make that put us in a position to where we were much more stable financially. It allowed for us to come in with my team, working with this current board, to really focus on teaching and learning, to just do the fundamental 101 things: rewriting curriculum, getting it vetted by the Council for Great City Schools, giving our people the right kind of professional development, making sure that our principals have the resources that they need to be great instructional leaders. All of those things, putting an instructional framework in place, all of those things have contributed to our school district making the kind of progress that we're making.
Well, when can patrons expect the district to be fully accredited?
I mean, my intention is to get there by the end of this year. We're getting ready to take our next round of assessments, and you know, we think that we've put a formula in place that will allow for us to continue to make the growth. But I do want our community to know that just getting accreditation, I mean, it's a great thing to get, but
But that's what patrons should expect of a school district, is it not?
Yeah, well, I mean,
that's like a minimum expectation.
It's a baseline, right? We have a long ways to go, and I think we will celebrate, but our ultimate goal is that we want our kids competing at or above state average on proficient and advanced performance. We want them to compete at the national level on NAEP and ACT and AP and IB, and we're not going to stop until we get there, but it is about expectations. All of these kids can achieve, and I know some of our kids show up with variables that work against them, but they can be successful.
When you get there, come back and talk to us about it, all right?
Sure thing.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to meet you.
Thanks
for coming in. That is Kansas City, Missouri School Superintendent Dr. Mark Bedell. Now let's meet the panel and start a ruckus! Jason Grill is the founder of J Grill Media and a senior advisor at Paris Communications. Dave Trobert is the president of the Kansas Policy Institute. Michelle Watley is the founder of the Griot Consulting Group. And Crosby Kemper III is the executive director of the Kansas City Library System and host of KCPT's, be helpful if I got the call letters correctly, Meet the Past and Centropolis programs. Thanks to all of you for coming in. Welcome to the program. Let us start by staying with the topic of education and discussing some of the issues raised in my discussion with Dr. Bedell. Kansas Cityans will decide the fate of a 3/8-cent sales tax for pre-K education on April the 2nd. Bedell and other school officials are opposed for a variety of reasons. The Chamber of Commerce, among others, has offered support for the project, which will be on the ballot because of the backing of Mayor Sly James. During his 8 years in office, James has usually gotten his way. Can he get one last victory with the pre-K tax? And we'll start with Michelle.
If he does, it won't be without a fight. You've seen grassroots opposition from community leaders in a way that you haven't seen for other initiatives that the mayor has passed. However, the mayor has, great approval ratings across the city, and he's been able to get a lot of things done. So if he is able to pass it, it's going to be a battle.
How do you explain this opposition? Kansas Cityans should be accustomed to sales tax increases.
Well, maybe we're too accustomed.
Well,
yeah, and maybe that's part of it. And it's not only the tax increase. There are, as the superintendent mentioned, a number of issues with oversight, where the money goes, who oversees the money. And I think that the general public and in some ways a lot of community organizations that have a hand in education or work with our community have a problem with
the
it.
school officials won't be able to run the program the way they want to run it.
Well, they don't even have,
It'll be run by a
adequate
board and by
representation,
the mayor.
in which 15 school districts only have one seat, right? And so when you don't have support from 15 different school districts, I think to your average voter, that's problematic.
Crosby, pick up on your point about sales tax increases.
Well, number one, we have among the highest taxes in the United States in Kansas City, among the highest sales taxes. Sales taxes are regressive. They affect the poor, particularly the working poor, much more than anyone else. So it's a terrible way to do this. But there's also a problem with the way we're going to spend the money. The mayor has no brief, the city council, the city itself, no brief for education, has never done education before. I was on this commission originally, and I said, look, we have an early childhood program, Head Start. Let's find out how well we're doing with that. We've never done that. It's about a quarter to a third of the students that would be in this program, and we don't know how well we're already doing on this. We do know one thing. We don't do teacher education well in Kansas City. UMKC, University of Central Missouri, et cetera, have historically not produced good teachers, and we're going to have a much larger teacher pipeline, and we know quality teachers are what are needed. We need to solve that problem before we spend money.
Dave, do we see a lot of pre-K education in Kansas?
There's a lot of push for it, Mike, and I'd say it's well intended. The problem is, I mean, it's not that there's not a benefit to pre-K education, but when you put those kids into a system that isn't really working, those benefits are pretty soon lost. We did an analysis a few years ago when they were talking about all-day kindergarten in Kansas, and when we looked at the test scores and compared the districts that had all day with those who didn't, in the 3rd or 4th grade, there really wasn't any difference in the reading scores.
Dr. Burdell, Jason said that it's likely the district will be fully accredited by year's end. What would that mean for the district and for Kansas City?
I mean, they accomplished the baseline, right? The minimum that they need to accomplish. I think a lot of this issue, it's going to be, I think, kind of close, but at the end of the day, I think, you know, it's going to come down to the mayor's popularity too, right? So if I had to guess right now, I would say it's probably not going to pass, the pre-K initiative, but I wouldn't be surprised if it did.
Are you surprised by the opposition?
A little bit, but as a former state representative, I know that education systems in our state and our country don't change very fast, and I think that the charter schools have done pretty good things. The Kaufman School's done pretty good things, and I'd like to see more innovation in the education system in our country and in our state because I feel like the world's changing, and I feel like we haven't done anything to address kind of the entrepreneurial boom and just different ways that people look at their jobs these days.
Dave, talk a bit more about what full accreditation actually means for a school district.
Well, it depends on where they set the bar. In Kansas, for example, it's set rather low. Kansas is moving away from accrediting school buildings and accrediting districts. And I asked the Board of Education, when was the last time someone lost accreditation? They can't remember. Now, we have some schools that have very, very low achievement. I mean, the average test score is way below grade level, and yet nothing happens. So it depends on where the line gets set to qualify for accreditation.
Is this a major defeat for Mayor James if this loses on Tuesday?
It's a pretty bad defeat going out. He made this his one attempt to do something for the East Side, to do something for the poor and minorities in his mayoralty, and I think it will lose. All the mayoral candidates, with the exception of his chosen successor, Jolie Justice, are opposed to it.
And they would be the ones that have to carry it out if it were to pass. So,
exactly.
I mean, I think that's very telling that you've got a government and business supporting it, but you can't get educational leaders to back it, and I think the public see that. They see that also.
All right, the future of pre-K education is not the only issue voters in Kansas City will decide next Tuesday. 2 of the 11 candidates for mayor will be nominated to face off in the June general election. KCPT hosted a forum for mayoral candidates last week at the Plaza Library, broadcasting the hour-long event last Friday and Sunday. All of the candidates showed up, including some who did not meet the minimum criteria for taking part. One of those was Clay Chastain.
I have an obligation to take care of my daughter who I have sole custody of. I can't leave Virginia. But I will if I get this job because her mother's coming down and she'll take care of her. Did you know that?
Actually, I did not. Crosby, you were at the library kind of hosting the event before Nick Haynes took over, and you've watched the mayor's race for several months. What are some of your thoughts as we go into the final few days?
My thoughts is that we've heard a lot of pablum from the candidates and very few very specific ways of dealing with our problems. We've heard almost nothing about the $700 million pension gap we've got. Crime, everybody talks about crime, but there's no real specific plan for computer-aided policing or real community policing. Taxes, we're the highest, one of the highest tax cities in the United States. And Quentin Lucas and Alicia Kennedy have talked a little bit about that, particularly in terms of sales taxes. But the taxes and crime have not been serious issues in this campaign in terms of any specifics at all. So I'm very disappointed in all the candidates.
So Mayor James endorsed Jolie Justice.
That's right.
Kansas City Star has endorsed Alicia Kennedy and Phil Glenn. What do you think of those endorsements?
I thought that most people in our realm of people that work in this sector were kind of surprised by those endorsements, but those 2 candidates have done well at the debates that I've watched and seen. You know, new candidates always do well. They have new ideas, and then Alicia Kennedy is kind of she's kind of being more bold in these debates. She's actually putting out opposition to some of the other city councilpersons. She's kind of separating herself from the rest of the city council. But at the end of the day, I still think the front runners are Jolie Justice and Steve Miller.
All right, and Steve Miller got the endorsement of Forward Kansas City, which is a North Kansas City group. You're a young woman in Kansas City. Michelle, do you find a lot of interest in this election among your friends?
It's almost by on opposite ends. I either have friends that are highly engaged and ready to vote or paying attention to what's going on, and then I have friends and people in my circle who don't even know there's an election, and that's indicative of most of Kansas City at this point. You've got over 40% of voters who are undecided, and we are within the week of voting. So I think the candidates are maybe just playing it safe and not doing the work to really differentiate themselves and put their races out there. You're just only starting to see real traction, and I think, yeah, that's kind of disappointing. After coming off the heels of 2018, where we were highly engaged, I thought that would maybe trickle down to the local level.
But doesn't the real battle begin when you've got two finalists?
Yes.
I think it does, but I think in this case, when you have so many candidates and the threshold to be in the top two is so low, you've got to do more work to make sure your base is out and that you put yourself out there. And I don't know that we've.
And I would say that we have good candidates. I will get more into the KCPT debate, but I thought that was really well done. And there were a lot of issues discussed. And
well, they all came out against potholes. I mean,
which may be the major issue.
Well, and 6 of them didn't take any credit for the potholes, though they've been around while they were building. I disagree with Jason. I'm really disappointed in the lack of specificity. These candidates don't have programs to do anything about the real problems.
But Crosby, once we get to 2, they're going to have more time to talk about more issues, right?
Well, one could hope.
Yeah.
Well,
one could hope.
Dave, Kansas City, Missouri doesn't have a strong mayor form of government. It's a council manager form. 12 members of the city council. Most of the administrative authority rests with the city manager. The mayor has some. Is it really that critical who is the mayor of Kansas City?
It should be. In theory, it should be, Mike. But in this case, I don't know that it really makes a tremendous amount of difference because they both, regardless of whether it's time or what the circumstance is, there's really not much difference between most of those candidates. I agree with Crosby. I think that they're mostly all talking in generalities. It's about more government intervention and not doing anything to really deal with the underlying problems of high taxes and high crime.
I think Jolie Justice and Steve Miller have raised the most amounts of money. Is that significant?
I think so. I think that's why most people think that they're the 2 front runners. But again, I would be shocked if Jolie Justice didn't make the final 2. That's probably the only thing that would shock me. If somebody else made the second person who maybe we didn't expect, like Phil Glenn or Kennedy or Lucas, that wouldn't shock me, or one of the Scotts, Scott Taylor, Scott Wagner, that wouldn't shock me as much. But if Jolie is not in the final 2, I would be kind of shocked.
So you're not easily shocked?
I'm very shocked if that happens.
Right. Only then.
Only then.
Then and only then. In only 5 presidential elections has the winning candidate not received the majority of the popular vote. 2 of the 5 in the 21st century, and both winners were Republicans. Victory in those 5, as in all presidential elections, came through the constitutional method established by the founders, the Electoral College. Motivated mostly, I guess, by Donald Trump's victory over Hillary Clinton, some of the current Democratic presidential hopefuls are calling for abolition of the college. Proponents say the popular vote should prevail. After all, the majority rules, but others remind us that the U.S. has a federal system, shared sovereignty between the states and the national government, and that presidential contests are and should be 50 state elections. Abolishing the Electoral College would require a constitutional amendment. That seems unlikely before the 2020 elections. Nonetheless, should this be taken seriously? Should the Electoral College be dumped? And we start with Jason.
I could see both sides of this argument, Mike, if you really take off your partisan glasses and think about it. I mean, I get the point that Democrats are making. Obviously 6 of the last 7 candidates for president for their party have won the popular vote. And they also believe every vote should count and wherever you live. I also believe the point of the other side that says, hey, let's not disenfranchise small states. Let's make sure rural votes count as well. My solution is why are we not just making every state? If you have 10 electoral votes, why is that not proportional? If Trump gets 60% and Clinton got 40%, why is it just not 6 electoral votes to Trump, 4 to Clinton? That to me is the best solution.
You said take off partisan glasses, so let me ask you this. If Hillary Clinton had won in 2016, would these Democratic presidential hopefuls be calling for a change in
probably
the Electoral
not.
College?
They probably would not. But again, like Barack Obama, Donald Trump was calling for an abolition of the Electoral College when it helped Barack Obama in 2008 or 2012, I believe. So again, you got to take off your partisan glasses and actually look at what's best for our country.
Dave, either leave your partisan glasses on or take them off, whichever you prefer. What are your thoughts about
a lot of
abolishing
people
the
don't
Electoral
think
College?
I can take my partisan glasses off, Mike. So, you know, when the Constitutional Convention concluded, Mrs. Powell of Philadelphia asked Ben Franklin, "What have you given us, Doctor, a republic or a monarchy?" And he said, "A republic, madam, if you can keep it." I think we need to keep the Electoral College if we want to keep our republic. And I'd remind and to reinforce what you said, Mike, it's a republic. It is not a democracy, and thank goodness. That's just two wolves and a sheep deciding what's for dinner.
A writer I know Crosby and I admire, and I think you do as well, Dave, George Will, put it this way: in a democracy, everyone votes for something. In a republic, voters decide who decides. There's the essential difference. Michelle, what do you think about abolishing the Electoral College?
I think it's going to be hard to abolish, especially in the climate that we have now. It'd be difficult to do. But I think it speaks to, and what candidates are speaking to, is a larger issue that voters are facing, and that they feel that their vote and their voice is not being heard. That's essentially what this boils down to. That, you know, although we've only had this happen in, 5 different elections, it's been 100 years since the last time it's happened. What has gone right in the last, 100 years before the last, few elections, before the popular vote was not enough to get the candidate elected? People, and I think regular voters, can't understand how, if there are enough votes for a candidate to win, they still don't win. That's problematic.
Well, the problem, I think, Crosby, is if you did it by just popular vote, wouldn't the major, larger states decide every presidential election?
That's the argument, as Jason said. We're having this discussion for one reason, because Hillary Clinton didn't go to Wisconsin. I think that's not a good reason to have a constitutional discussion. I also would point out, in those 5 elections that you mentioned, the person with the most votes, the plurality of votes, actually didn't get a majority. In none of those 5 elections, I'd have to explain this
Bill Clinton,
at a bar
for example,
in 1876 why that's true, but it didn't get a majority. So a majority of people actually voted against the person with the plurality. So you can make an argument for the Electoral College that way. At least the discussion about the Electoral College keeps our minds off the court packing plan. That is the other change of constitutional norms that's on the table right now.
And lowering the voting age in presidential elections to 16. Would that be a great idea?
I think that, we need
extreme, right?
It's a little extreme, but in essence, we need to make the access to voting and the ability for people to vote as easy as possible, right? This is part of what being in a democracy is about, right? People need to have access to the vote and be able to vote.
Well,
and to know
this
that their
doesn't
vote
keep
is counted.
people from voting. It depends on how the votes are counted.
It doesn't keep people from voting. But again, if I cast a ballot and you win, you get the most numerical votes, I expect that to be my candidate. I don't understand how a body...
Yeah, just don't give winner take all. Like Florida, give your electoral votes, split them up between who gets what percentage, and then it's all taken care of.
Well, of course, they can actually choose. The Electoral College members can choose who to vote for.
Right.
One of the reasons we have an Electoral College is so that we can have a constitution, because it was like the makeup of the Congress, something that you had to have fairness to the smaller states, or there would not have been a constitution.
Yeah, the smaller states need to matter.
No republic.
They need to matter in this whole debate, too.
All right. We're going to head now to the soapbox for Roast and Toast, where the Ruckettes have 30 seconds each to agitate, appreciate, or obviate. And we start with Dave.
A toast to Kansas Representative Christy Williams. She's behind 2 really important pieces of legislation this year. House Bill 2006 creates a database of all the state's taxpayer-funded giveaways and would require them to be periodically audited so we can learn whether they're really delivering on all those ribbon-cutting promises. She also developed legislation that requires school districts to develop their budgets from the classroom up and certify that funding is set aside so that kids are really getting the education they deserve. We need more accountability in government, and Representative Williams is a leading voice in that area.
All right, Michelle.
I want to give a toast to Shirley's Kitchen Cabinet. This week they hosted a Facebook Live series called Conversations with the Candidates, where they invited all the mayoral candidates to come in and sit down for a 30-minute one-on-one interview to talk about their platforms and issues. That is a very innovative way to bring the voices and platforms of the candidates to the people, and you can watch from your cell phone or living room. So it's a great way to be informed without having to get out of the house. So kudos to Shirley's Kitchen Cabinet and the candidates that participated.
Jason.
On that note, I want to also toast a mayoral forum that KCPT hosted. It was awesome. Nick Haynes hosted it. It was fast-paced, high energy. It actually brought out some energy out of the candidates, some boldness out of them, and it was exciting, entertaining. It's on YouTube now if you haven't seen it. I didn't know Crosby was involved until today. That makes me like it even more. And the only thing that was missing was Mike Shannon with pre and post game with each of the candidates. So that would have been the topping on the cake, icing on the cake we would have gotten it, Mike.
All right, Crosby.
So I'd like to toast the two candidates who, in that forum at the Kansas City Public Library for KCPT, pointed out that we have a regressive, high-tax system, very inequitable, incredibly unfair corporate tax incentives. Alicia Canaday, who was endorsed by the Star this week, and especially Quentin Lucas, who was the only one who was specific about setting standards in this city.
And finally, here's a toast to veteran journalist Ted Koppel, who told the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace that President Trump is not mistaken when it comes to his many complaints about modern journalism. Koppel cited so-called resistance to Trump by major newspapers, notably the New York Times and Washington Post. Koppel put it this way: "We are not the reservoir of objectivity that I think we once were." Hard not to agree with veteran journalist Ted Koppel, and by the way, his comments came before the Mueller report was made public. And that is Ruckus for this week. We're back next Thursday at 7. Now for the Ruckettes and the crew, I'm Mike Shannon saying thanks for watching and good night.